Hello there, guys. Mrs. Spurlock here. Now, for this week, we will be uh, looking at Chapter 42, Section 1. We are going to be skipping Chapter 41 only because it's a super sensitive subject, and I don't feel like covering it remotely is a good idea. So, we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump into immunity from diseases, a pretty relevant chapter for our lives right now. Today we're going to go over section 1. Next week we'll go over section 2. It is a very intense chapter. And then the following week will be time for a test. So we will see how that plays out. 42.1 is primarily over the nature of a disease, what we observe from it, what we expect from it, and what we know about it. Now, the word pathogen refers to anything that causes a disease. So, any biological thing that causes a disease. And I have to pick that word carefully because there is a consensus among many biologists and natural scientists that viruses don't actually count as living things because they rely on other organisms in order to be able to reproduce. Uh, a virus is completely unable to reproduce without a host organism. So it's hard to say living things that cause diseases as much as it would be convenient to do so. So it includes microorganisms and viruses, I guess you could say. Any disease that is caused by a pathogen is referred to as an infectious disease. A scientist named Robert Koch was the first to prove that a microbe could cause a disease. He did so in 1876, so the year the US turned 100 years old. What he observed was that something was killing cattle and sheep, and it was a bit of a mystery for everyone. Koch did something that nobody had thought of it to this point, and he took the blood and was looking into the blood, and he observed that all of the dead cattle and sheep had this one rod-shaped bacteria in common. The bacteria in the image along the side. So Koch took this bacteria and grew it in his lab and then infected a healthy animal. And this does sound, and it is pretty harsh, right? Well, unfortunately, we have to do these kinds of things in order to verify the safety of the medicines or other vaccines before they can be tested on humans. We use animals to test them, primarily animals that are pretty metabolically similar to humans, such as pigs or mice. The image to the left, the bacteria that Robert Koch discovered was killing these organisms, is anthrax. Now, based on what he observed, Koch developed 4 postulates. Koch's postulates are essentially experimental steps that can be used to prove that a certain microbe is causing a specific disease. The first thing one must do is they have to observe the pathogen in the host of every infected organism. So if you have a herd of cattle, and 7 of them are extremely ill, the only way to determine that that illness is from the microbe is for all of them to have the same symptoms and the same microbe. Once that pathogen has been determined, it then has to be isolated and grown in a lab. Once it's been grown in the lab, it will be injected into healthy host animals, and you must observe the same disease that you saw in the original organisms. Then, just to cover all of our bases, you must collect the pathogen from the newly infected organism and demonstrate that it is the same pathogen that you saw in the first organism. So just proving that it's the same kind of bacteria. There are some exceptions to Koch's postulates, and that includes the kinds of organisms that can't survive in a lab setting, as well as things that you just wouldn't grow in a lab setting because they're too dangerous, which if they knew more about anthrax at the time, that would have been one of them. Now, the spread of infectious disease can happen in a lot of different ways. And I am going to talk a little bit about the coronavirus while I discuss the spread of infectious disease. In order for a disease to continue in the first place, the pathogen has to be able to infect new and increasing numbers of hosts. The main source of pathogens is actually just the human body. Sometimes people can harbor pathogens and not catch the illness, and other times people will demonstrate an incubation period where they transmit the virus or bacteria or disease or pathogen. An extended period of time occurs and then they become sick. This is one of the dangerous things about the current pandemic, is that the coronavirus has an unusually long incubation period. Animals can also harbor pathogens. Certain rodents will carry rabies, and certain types of flu can be passed from animals to humans. The next source of transmission of a disease is soil and water. Soil, because that's where you find a lot of fungi and bacteria, and in a lot of cases where water is causing an infectious disease, that is because it has been contaminated by human or animal waste. Oh man, what a gross image. So transmission of disease from a reservoir to a host. A reservoir is going to be something that is carrying the disease, but either is not able to or doesn't catch it. And the first example is direct contact. Maybe somebody else came in contact with a virus or bacteria and they don't get sick, but they can pass it on to you. These are things like the common cold, influenza, and STDs. So it could be that the person's not infected. It can also occur, obviously, when the person is infected. The next is going to be object transmission. Diseases can enter a host after the host comes into contact with an object contaminated with a pathogen. And primarily when we're talking about object transmission, what we mean is in cases like food poisoning. However, with the coronavirus, like many of you have probably heard, the coronavirus can survive on hard surfaces for several days at a time. And one of the hopes is that in the summer, its ability to survive on surfaces will be hindered by the heat. So that's one of the reasons that there just aren't a lot of answers to anything right now, is we can't know exactly how this virus is going to behave in the warmer months. And the next transmission reservoir is air. Disease can be put into the air by a sneeze, cough, or other means of expelling liquid of the respiratory system. So in this image, you can clearly see how much liquid is coming out of this person's face while they sneeze, and it's very gross, and I hope you're equally as grossed out as I am. And then the last one is a vector. And a vector refers to organisms that are a part of the life cycle of whatever the pathogen is. So for certain viruses, they have to live in other parasites before they can infect a human. So for example, Lyme disease has to live in a tick before it can infect a human, and malaria has to live in the mouth part of a mosquito before it can infect a human. So I got these teeny tiny little invisible invaders in my body. Why do I have a fever and muscle aches, et cetera, et cetera? Why do pathogens cause the symptoms of disease? Primarily because they're damaging their host organism. When a virus infects a body, it comes in, it teaches your cells how to make little viral offspring, and the cell makes offspring until it literally explodes. And so every single time a single virus is infecting a cell, the population is growing tremendously. Some viruses, bacteria, pathogens can release toxins into the bloodstream that can damage your blood vessels. They can prevent your ability to make proteins, and they can even disrupt your nervous system. There are three main patterns of disease that I'm going to talk about right now. The first one is endemic, meaning it's just constantly present in a population. So for example, the chickenpox. The chickenpox are just constantly present in the human population. In an epidemic, there is a given area where a higher than usual number of people are afflicted with the same disease in a short period of time. And surprisingly not covered in your books, but too relevant not to mention, is a pandemic. And a pandemic occurs when many people are afflicted with the same disease in a short period of time over many different areas. So from cities to towns to countries to even continents, which is what we've seen in the most recent scenario. Treating diseases. When we have a disease caused by a pathogen, we've got three main forms of treatment. The first one is called an antibiotic. They stop the growth of or kill microorganisms. Antibiotics are dangerous for a few reasons. The first is that they can kill your gut bacteria. And your gut bacteria are really important for keeping things moving through the digestive system. So one of the very common side effects of taking an antibiotic for a long period of time is constipation, because you've killed all of your symbiotic gut bacteria. And the other really dangerous side effect of antibiotics is that for a period of time, it is speculated that antibiotics have been overprescribed. In the event that antibiotics are overprescribed, bacteria are very good at evolving resistance to them. And so now, where a typical hospital may stock 25 to 30 different types of antibiotics, in 2016, we did see the first totally antibiotic-resistant bacteria on US soil. Antivirals are medicines that stop the reproduction of viruses. And antibodies are proteins in our blood that tell our immune system when to kill something. So for example, once you've had a sickness, your body has learned about that sickness and it has developed antibodies to fight that pathogen that causes the sickness. So instead of getting the same flu or the same cold over and over again, you might get infected with a single type of bacteria or virus a few times in your life, because your body figures out how to fight it off. Doesn't happen all the time, but it is a relatively reliable system. And that is going to do it for section 42.1. I'll see you next week for 42.2. Bye.